And welcome to episode number 19 of the Be Life podcast, coming to you from Canton Nazarene Church in Canton, Ohio. And I before we continue, I want to tell you, if you like this and you enjoy this journey we're on and you enjoy tuning into this, please take a moment to subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcast and all those other things that I have no idea what it's all about. But if you do that, we'd appreciate it greatly, and you can continue this journey and find us easier. I am joined today by an amazing lady. Her name is Julie Edwards, and she is half of the team known as Julie and Jeff Edwards, and they are remarkable. They are members of our church here. Julie happens to be a flight attendant, and Julie, most people do flight attendant stuff because they want the perks to fly here and there. They think it's glamorous. Julie does it because it's her mission.
Yes.
And before we continue, first of all, thank you for taking time. Tell everybody what happened to you yesterday, and then tell everybody what your mission, why being a flight attendant is your mission, please.
Okay. Yeah. Well, everybody knew of the Microsoft meltdown yesterday. Well, that didn't just affect various airlines. It also affected retail. It affected people at the gas pump. You could not use a debit or credit card. There were hospitals that were affected. There were surgeries canceled. I was on a trip, which they basically manufacture schedules. I was on a schedule. I had a personal day put aside for today because I normally am out for 4 days. So with weather, and I'm also based in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I commute when there is an open seat to work, and then I commute home. Well, yesterday with the meltdown, and that started, I believe, some people said it was at midnight the night before, but it actually, there were certain things I couldn't get on my schedule, like at 5 o'clock. So I knew there were certain things that were happening before then, but that was when everything kind of crashed. They said it was some antivirus software. I really don't know. I just know it affected a lot of people. And so there were even some people that were traveling that night around that time. There were a lot of people tragically stranded at the Charlotte airport about midnight that night. So needless to say, I was in Greensboro, North Carolina. We were commuting the next day. We had dealt with weather from Wednesday to Thursday, which is normal for summer flying. And we got in late. So both nights were called a minimum rest, to where you get 8 hours behind the hotel door, 10 hours before you fly again. So when we were in Greensboro, we had gotten everything changed to where they had delayed our flight because of crew rest. We got to the airport. We're waiting for the flight. I was talking to the gate agents, as I always do, and they had said that they were the only ones out of that airport. American Airlines was the only ones that were able to get out of that airport. Delta had canceled numerous flights. United had canceled numerous flights. But when I try to give the passengers as much information as I can, because that way it eases their tension. They know exactly what to expect when they get there. I try to give them as much information as possible. And I pray. That's my calm. When I'm on the road, I watch the radar for the weather, and I listen to Christian music. I listen to podcasts, anything that's going to calm my nerves. And I pray. I'm like, Lord, you got this. I pray over every flight, all the passengers, every day that I fly.
Now, I got a text from Jeff saying, you better have a backup to, this and that. And I said, look, I made up my mind. I was going to, a lot of times, I would jump and say, all right, I got to have a backup. I told you, and I told Jeff this too. I said, I'm not even going to think of me. I'm not even going to think of the podcast. I'm going to pray for you and Jeff, and I'm going to worry about that. Whatever happens, happens. I want God to be in charge of this whole thing. And next thing I get a text from you saying, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. I'll be in tonight. My hero is picking me up at the airport.
Yeah, my superhero.
Which is awesome. Speaking of Jeff. And I'll be in. And, you know, I thought it was so nice just to back off and do this. But you made it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now I want to talk about real quick before we get into the real reason that Julie's here today. Talk about being a flight attendant as a mission.
Well, God had started this I've been flying for 5 years. So, and the year before that, I worked at the local airport, Canton Akron. I worked on the ramp, loading bags on the aircraft. I also worked inside the ticket counter, the gate agent. So when they would delay flights, when they would cancel flights, I was behind the scenes working for the passengers.
Taking all the heat.
Taking care of the passengers. You look at who your focus is on, the person in front of you, helping them the best that you can, and then you move on to the next. And with doing that, you don't feel overwhelmed, because it can be really overwhelming. You listen to the people in front of you, understanding. I always think of this is a family member that needs to get to where they need to go. If it's a funeral, if it's a cruise, if it's, you know, for whatever reason, I'm helping that person first. And a lot of times I'll make jokes. And so it really helps alleviate the stress and the anger, because and people would get up and they were like, how can you be so calm? And I'm like, well, I am Jesus with skin on.
Wow.
And that is the mission. I am his light in the airport, all situations. I call it airport appreciation. My husband laughs at me because I've got so many different tricks and trades and whatever. So when I commute in, when there's an open seat and I can get into work, normally I'm there minimum 2 hours early, because I don't like stress. It's much easier to sit in the airport to wait for your trip than to be rushing at the last minute. So when I'm there, I make myself available. They have a crew room that is not accessible to passengers, but I sit in the airport. If I'm going to be airport appreciation, I am going to help whoever what may. So I'm sitting at the gate. Just a lot of times I'm listening to music. I've got my earpods in because I don't know, you don't want to offend somebody if that's not their music, whatever. But I mean, yeah, just bebopping along. And when I see a passenger that is talking to a gate agent that they don't feel that they're getting the quite understanding, because there's a lot of people, different cultures, different languages that are traveling. So I can use my Translate application on my tablet that I use for work. So there was a young gentleman when I got there, and he was traveling to Birmingham from Charlotte, and the flight was oversold because of all of the storms. So he was considered a revenue standby because that was not his flight. So he was not understanding. He was worried about his belongings, his checked bag. So I was using my app as well as all the other things that I know to give him the understanding, so that way he would know. And I was able to help him track his checked bag. And it was on the plane that he was hoping to get on, but it was full. So I showed him that his bag was going to be in Birmingham waiting on him. So he was going to get there sometime today, but he didn't have to worry about his bag. So I explained everything to him. I said, if you have any questions, I said, talk to somebody at American. It'll be by the baggage claim area. They have a baggage office, and that's where your bag will be.
I like to use the term oasis in the desert. I think our church is like that.
Yes, it is.
You're there. a lot of times people don't have the same motivation
Yeah.
as you.
Yeah.
They're counting the minutes that they have to be there. They're not living in the moment.
No, they're not
Um,
accessible.
yeah, but there's yes, and the reason they're not accessible is they aren't the changed heart that you are,
Correct.
and and people don't realize how much of a difference that makes, because your motivation is not the motivation of paycheck. It's not the motivation of putting in your time. It's a motivation of living in the moment, being
Correct.
present, and loving Jesus Christ,
Yes.
and then loving the people through
Yes.
him. And that's amazing. Now, I want to get to the main point.
Okay.
We have had on this show, you've seen, if you follow us at all, we've had some remarkable stories. We've had some leaders in our community. We're going to have others, leaders in the community. We've had young people who have gone through traumatic things, being on the streets, being addicted to substances, all kinds of things. So, really dramatic stuff a lot of times. But we haven't had, what we don't realize is, we have a lot of people who've grown up in the church, who've been involved with families that know Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And there are struggles that go with that also. There are many times that those people in the church where they have the doubts, they have the concerns, they may go off and they may want to go off. There may be a pull of the world, but they can't say it because they have to conform to a certain extent, because they may be the pastor's kid or something like that. And so Julie happens to be one of those people.
I am a PK.
and go ahead and tell us, let's just start out by you telling us the type of house you grew up in. I know there had to be a ton of love and everything else, but there also was a ton of pressure, I think, to conform and to be part of something. So just tell us how your father, the whole story.
Well, my dad actually had various jobs before he decided to stop fighting God and let God lead. It was probably when I was 2.5 when he finally stopped running from God, because at the time we lived in Illinois. It was Wisconsin, but he worked for Illinois Bell. And I think him and my mom had a talk, and he's like, I feel the call, Grace. I can't run anymore. So he left us. My mom was pregnant with my sister, number 4th child. I was number 3, and went to the Nazarene Bible College in Colorado Springs, Colorado. They flew him out. He was away from us for 9 months. And he would try to call my mom and talk to my mom when all of us kids were asleep. Well, I was one of those kids that if I was tired, I was going to bed. I didn't stay up late, but I would get up so super early. I could watch, as some of the older folks might know, Soupy Sales. He was my favorite. And Mr. Ed, before, all the other stuff would come on. But I remember one time waking up and he was talking to my mom. And I could hear, but I wasn't sure. And I was like, that's got to be Dad. So my mom said he was somewhere, like maybe in a mall before it closed or whatever. And he was on the payphone back in the day with the cord. And he was talking to her. And then I must have picked up the other line, because back in the day, when you picked up the other phone, it was the same phone.
Oh, yeah.
And he heard my little voice say, Daddy, I love you.
Oh.
And he sobbed. And at that time, he had told my mom they had gotten a hold of the district superintendent of where we lived in Wisconsin. And he said, it's time, Grace. Pack up the kids and come. Rent the house. We'll deal with all that later. He goes, it's time for the family to be back together.
Wow.
So the district superintendent flew with us since my mom had so many, little kids to travel with. And it was funny because my oldest sister, she's about 7.5 years older than I am. And we didn't know the guy from Adam. My dad did, and maybe my mom did. But it was so funny because I remember one of my siblings going, "Do you smoke? I hope you don't smoke. We don't like smoke." But it was just fabulous to see my dad, and with all the struggles of just various things, where the money was going to come from, where this and that were coming from. I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we just knew we lived in a rented house in Colorado Springs, regular neighbors around.
How was your mom during this, Julie? And we're talking with Julie Edwards, by the way. And I was your mom. She was probably, mothers have a tendency to be more nurturing and nest. They're concerned about the things of the house, though, and the kids. But she had to be also supportive and knowing that this is where God was leading you.
There was a lot of times mom knew before dad knew.
That it was.
Mom knew that this was going to be his ultimate mission, but he had to figure it out.
Right.
And it was so funny. My mom would always say, "Dave, God told me a year ago, it was up to you to let God lead."
Wow. Now, he's now at this point where you've moved in, you've rented the house. I assume he knew the Lord.
Yes.
The whole time you were alive.
Absolutely.
So nothing really changed in the house.
No.
The only difference was he was now a minister.
He was studying to be a minister.
Right.
He graduated, all the whatever ins and outs.
But the house was still the same.
Correct. The house
it wasn't
was still
like
the
he
same.
went from, okay, we're crazy and now all of a sudden we're not. So you were raised from the very day you were born in a Christian home.
Correct.
Now let's go. You're how old when you moved to Colorado Springs?
I was 2.5. And when we moved back to Wisconsin, the house that I remembered, which was a little bit the same, but a little bit different. He was the pastor, and my dad wasn't he was called to be a church planter, which back in the day, it was a church that was already there, maybe has 2 or 3 people that are there, but I would consider it now to be a church resurrector.
Okay.
We would go in when we lived in Burlington, Wisconsin, and he felt the Lord staying there, and they had lost their pastor. I don't even know how long ago, but there were only 3 people there. There was a gentleman and his wife and their son. And their son was older. He played the organ and she would play the piano, and then her husband would clean. So there might have been 2 or maybe 3 more other people, but
that was the congregation?
That was the congregation. So there would be times when I remember that it was maybe one or two Saturdays, Dad went out knocking on doors, inviting people to church. Well, when it was just him, people wouldn't answer the door or they'd slam it in his face. So one Saturday, he asked us kids, he's like, "Hey, who wants to put on their best clothes and go knock and, invite people to church?" And I'm like, "I will, Daddy." And it was about time I got to spend with Dad all by myself. I was like, that was awesome. Put on my best little dress, go knocking on doors, because every single person would open the door when they saw him with a child.
Yeah.
And I was the first one. "Hey, you want to come to church tomorrow?"
Did you get people then?
Yes. There was we were there for about 5 years.
Yeah. And
it had grown so much that little white church was basically blowing up in size. We literally had to bring in folding chairs to the pews.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because it was running over 100, and it broke my dad's heart when he had to tell the people that he was feeling God leading him away.
And now, so how many times did you move?
Oh my. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times before my senior year in high school.
6 different places.
I was in 3 different high schools.
So what were the challenges involved in that? When you, I guess, was there ever, as you started growing, getting older, and you started to look at your own spirituality, was there ever a point where you felt like you wanted to rebel?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Because my parents always said that's wrong. But kids, they're like, yeah, right, whatever.
Why are
I'm
you
gonna
telling me
try
it's
it.
wrong?
And I learned, I'm like, dude, they're right. Dad was right. And so I learned early on, and there was punishment in our house, absolutely. Mom was a firm believer in spare the rod or spoil the child.
Right.
And so, of course, there was probably some things we got away with. It wasn't super bad, but we knew it was wrong. So, I mean, kids always try to push the boundary to see if that boundary is going to move or if it's going to stay firm and you're going to get the punishment.
That's
All kids
interesting.
do. All kids do.
That's interesting. But I guess I'm looking deeper, Julie.
Okay.
It's not so much that you're going to get punished.
Yeah.
It's what's going on deeper in your spirit, in your soul, to say all these things that my father told me, that my mother and father told me, that we've been raised believing. Was there ever a point by switching high schools and all this stuff that you ever wanted to say, I need to just abandon this and go off on my own? Or were you always kind of tied to it?
Well,
and did you feel a pressure to do it because of who your father was?
I didn't feel the pressure of who he was, but I was like, I want to fit in. When anytime a child moves, they just want to be part of the group. Some of those kids have grown up together, so you're odd man out. So if you don't join them, you're an outsider.
So joining them may mean joining them.
Doing things that you know are wrong, but you're doing it to fit in.
Yeah.
And
so
I did that.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. But I learned early on that if you can't accept me for who I am, I'll find somebody who will. And I found a few.
So you went off and said, okay, I'm going to join, but you always knew.
Yes.
I'm acting out. I'm acting in a way that I really don't like.
Yes.
I'm doing it to fit in, but I don't feel comfortable.
Correct.
And so when did you actually hit a point where you said, I'm going to be me?
It was actually my senior year in high school.
The third high school?
It was the very last high school, Beloit, Wisconsin. We moved there. It was literally like, we lived in Neosho, Missouri before that. And they did not they wanted to be able to control what my dad preached. They didn't like the thorny part, so to speak.
What's the thorny part? Explain.
He was preaching the word. He was
unabashed,
thoroughly convicted.
Yeah.
But he taught in a way to where people were uncomfortable. And they tried attacking him various ways to get him to leave. And then they started attacking us kids. I don't know how, but when he said enough is enough, we're leaving. And Mom had already started packing boxes before we even knew. And so the last day of school, they're like, we're out of here. And I was like, what? I have a job. I was working at the Wendy's, like I could walk to.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, no, we're done. Well, my brother had graduated high school when we lived in Neosho, Missouri. So he stayed behind. He went to college and became his life kind of on his own. And so there was only 4 of us at the time, and we were all girls. So we moved to Beloit, Wisconsin with mom and dad.
Mm-hmm.
Got us all, registered for school and whatever. And, I found a job at the local grocery store bagging groceries, which I could walk to from school.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, first day of school, I'm trying to fit in. I was in a marketing class where, some of the kids, I'm like, I felt a part there, but I'd never gone to football games. I might have in junior high when we lived in Oklahoma, but I was like the pep clubs, which was fabulous because we could just scream and, be crazy. But I only got to go to a few. But that was where I was like, you know what, I want to try and fit in. So I knew when I went to a house with a friend after the football game, it was by like a Catholic high school or Catholic school or whatever. And I sat on the porch because I could smell something that was making me dizzy. And when I came home, my dad was like, what were you doing? And so I told him. I never lied to my dad because I knew he would always figure out. So I might as well just be honest. Because when you're honest, the punishment is less worse. Just saying.
Yes.
So, so I'm like, Dad, I'm dizzy. And he's like, well, you're high. And I was like, what? I was like, I wasn't even in the house. I was like, I smelled something. I was like, it was funky smelling. And I said, I wasn't going to go in. So my friend went in, but I didn't. And he goes, who is your friend? So I told him, and he goes, don't hang out with her. She's a bad influence. And I listened to him. I was like, you know what? I was like, I don't need this. I've got 1 more year and then I'm going to start at Olivet. I'm not going to do this. And so I was in their DECA program, which you can work half of the year. So I went to school for 4 classes. And then my last class was marketing. And then I walked about 1.5 miles to work. I worked at the grocery store.
Did you find Christian friends then?
No, actually.
You didn't?
Because the church that my dad went to plant there, it had closed. So we were actually having church in our house. We would set up folding chairs in the living room, and that's where we would hold church.
So you were never in a church like this that had a full-blown, like our church that has full-blown children's program, youth program.
No. My mom was the children's church pastor. She would also lead worship. Most of our churches were small. Now, when they got bigger, I think there were people that would step up, that they would do children's church, and they might rotate. Always had Sunday school classes. I don't remember who taught, but I do know that they left an imprint on my life.
But there wasn't kids that you could, like my wife Kirby grew up in a Lutheran church.
Uh-huh.
And so her mother was on staff there and the whole thing. And they had this thing called Luther League, which was their youth. And so her friends growing up were always the church kids.
Yeah.
And so she had a group that she could bond to.
Yeah.
But you never had that.
No.
Now, what about your sister? You had 3 sisters and 1 brother.
Yes.
Okay, so
it's kind of like 3 separate families because my oldest sister is like 7.5 years older than I am.
Right.
Then I have a brother that's 1.5 years older than I am. Then I have a sister that's 2.5 years younger than I am. And then I have a sister who is a flight attendant as well that is 9.5 years younger, which if you put our baby pictures together, we're twins, just 9.5 years apart.
all of them came through this like you.
Correct.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But so you had each other.
Yes.
And that was probably your support group.
Correct.
Was just your group together.
Yeah.
Because you're moving 6 times.
Yeah. When we lived in Oklahoma, there was a girl that I became true friends with. She lived about 1.5 miles from me, a single parent household. Mom was a nurse. Mom worked midnights. And she had an older sister that was, I think her sister was like 5 years older than her. And then she had a brother that was 2 years younger. But she was my best friend. She accepted me for who I was. And at the time I had a lazy eye, which if you don't know, it's when your muscle will like pull your eye somewhere else. So, I mean, I was made fun of growing up, cross-eyed, weirdo. I'm like, okay, if that's the worst you got, okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, it hurt, but I'm not going to let them know. But when we lived in Oklahoma, my dad found somebody in the Oklahoma City. He was part of the General Assembly or the people there. Well, this doctor he ended up somehow knowing my dad. And he said, God's told me, if you're willing, I will do the surgery on your daughter's eye and it will correct it. So, and the funny thing about it is this gentleman's his last name was Cornelius and his wife's name was Iris.
Oh, no.
And I was like,
No.
and now looking back,
No.
that was 100% God, because my dad didn't have to pay a dime. We didn't have a dime to give, but mom had always a daycare in the home. A lot of times that helped provide for our family. Sometimes it wasn't enough, but God always made sure we had enough. There would be sometimes they would get a letter in the mail, never knew who it was from. They would get a money order or a cashier's check or something, and they would get a letter that said, God told me you needed this.
Wow.
And it was literally exact amount for the bills that we had that month.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes my parents had to decide, what bill are we not going to pay so that there's food on the table. Mm. We always did different chores for whomever, whatever, to help buy school supplies for the next year or help buy shoes. Because I can tell you that there were times we went to Dollar General to buy their shoes because we could buy 5 pairs for $10. Those sometimes were my shoes. Nobody ever, when you're that young, back that day, nobody cared. My friends didn't care. They didn't.
And you didn't?
No. I was like, I got shoes. They don't have holes in them.
Are your mom and dad still alive?
No, my mom passed away when my daughter Kaylee was a month old.
Okay. And
she had a leaky heart valve that she had found, and she stopped taking the medication. And she had they said it was a heart attack and an aneurysm burst at the same time. And I think she was ready. We weren't, of course.
Yeah.
But she was ready. And then my dad passed away in 2008. And he had always struggled with breathing. We believed maybe it was from a warehouse, maybe that he had worked at as a second job and got the asbestos. And so he had always struggled with breathing, and it had gotten worse at a certain point. So his wife at the time, Jan, she finally got him to go to the doctor because we're like, this isn't right. She's like, well, I've been trying. And so we finally got it. So we finally talked to him, and he finally agreed to go see the doctor, got him in an antibiotic. They had to go through like 3 different antibiotics, and then finally one worked. So he's like, oh, I'm feeling better. Oh, I'm feeling better. And he went out to mow the grass, and he had a mulcher on his riding lawnmower, and it wreaked the ultimate to where he ended up having to go to the hospital. Couldn't breathe on his own. They put the breathing machine on him. When my youngest sister Jeanette and I, when we found out, we were like, we got to go. So I took both of my kids. I was separated at the time, and I took both of my kids. I said, we're going to go see Grandpa. I feel very strongly we need to go see Grandpa. And they're like, okay, let's go. Yeah. Let's go. Road trip.
Yeah.
And it was such a fabulous decision because my sister and I and my kids got to spend true time with my dad. Even though he was in ICU, they let my kids in. And I think they knew at the time that he needed the family. And to spend that time with my dad before everybody else came and all the noise. That's the time that my sister and I still have. It was such an amazing God time because we got to talk to him before it got towards the end to where he couldn't talk to us, so he had to write.
Right.
And the legacy that he has left. Because when I finally said, okay, God, I'll carry the torch, whatever you want me to do. And that was when I started going through the healing process to heal from all the baggage all the lies that I had believed.
Lies about what?
Oh, just you're not good enough. Nobody wants you. You're never going to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And we first started, my husband and I, the previous church that we went to, there was a couple that would teach a program called Cleansing Streams.
Mm-hmm.
And it was to help you deal with all your past hurts, to give them to God and don't pick them back up. And I went through that, maybe 4 times, because they would do it in the spring and the fall. And then after the 4th time I did it, I was asked to be part of the team because they would do like a 6-week course, and it was each week.
But when you were part of the team, did you feel like you had arrived? Or
No.
did you still feel like...
No, I felt unworthy. I felt I wasn't good enough for that position.
Now,
God had me there.
I got to ask you this, Julie, because you were raised in a loving Christian home. When, being in that environment, you knew you were saved.
Yeah.
How could you feel unworthy? Because you moved, because you never got accepted, because
of Satan. He will tell you lies. He will find the place that you're most weakest and use it against you. He will.
Yeah.
I'm living proof. He will.
Well, see,
but then you say, forget you.
And that didn't happen until your father died.
After it was, it was after when my dad passed away. We were there literally until 5:00 on July 3rd of 2008. They were going to do a celebration of life service at the church that my stepmom's son, her son-in-law was at. They were doing a church plant there because the Nazarene church had closed.
Mm-hmm.
So we went into like a building where they were at, and we were there eating before the celebration service. And they were reading, I think it was Psalms 139 was what they were reading when he went to be with Jesus.
Hmm.
And it was weird. But then as we were eating, my uncle was there, and he was my mom's brother, my mom's stepbrother, because her mom had passed when she was young. And he had told me, he said, this is weird. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, your mom passed away at 7 a.m. in the morning. Your dad passed away at 7 p.m. Isn't 7 completion?
I
was like, yeah, it is. It is.
And I want you to know this, because you're talking to someone who I was not raised. I came to Christ late in life, so to speak.
You're never late. You're always right on time.
But I was a bonehead. But so there's a part of me that still feels, being in the role I am now as lay minister and this stuff, I love doing this. This is where I should be. However, there's still a part of me underneath that says, ooh, someone's going to find out what I'm really like. I'm inadequate. I feel inadequate
No, you're
because I wasn't raised in the church. I don't feel as good as you because you've always known the Lord, and I'm just here. And so I go through that struggle. What's interesting, what I want people to understand is you could be raised in a church
Yes, you can.
and still go through those struggles.
Yes. I also went through a divorce in 2008. So I also went through a divorce care program too. And I coined the phrase, divorce doesn't define you. It's what happens to you. It's what you do is what's going to make a difference. And God has taught me your mess is my message. All of your messes that you've done, you can share it to help somebody else. That's it.
Did that divorce cause you to go back and say I'm not good enough?
No, I held on to the hem of his garment with everything I had.
Wow.
Because when that happened and I felt things unraveling, I held it together in front of the kids, cry in the shower. And I think my son heard me once. Didn't come in, but he could hear me. He could hear me sobbing. And I'm like, Lord, how am I going to do this? I let my marriage define who I was. I didn't let God define who I was.
Wow.
And when I went through that, I went through the New Testament and I had index cards on my Bible and scripture that meant so much to me. I penned it out. The chapter, the verse, I penned it all out. And it is still in my Bible to this day because I don't want to forget. I had various friends that went through divorces that reached out to me. And it's literally like I was opening the wound back up and pouring salt in it. But going through that, helping them, helped me heal in a way. That was when I started with the Cleansing Streams. My husband and I went with a church group to Israel in 2015. He was telling me that God told him that he needed to get me to Israel. But I wasn't seeing that. And then God reminded me that he told my mom a lot of times when it was for my dad. So we found out that that was for my husband, not for me.
Wow.
But when we got back, God said, you're going next year, but you're not going with Jeff.
Wow.
I need you there by yourself. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm like,
you went?
And I went. And that was where my true healing began.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And Jeff has been a part of this. He is just, he's amazing. You two together are awesome.
When we got married, he was like, I'm going to let you be you. Because I'm not into changing anybody. I never have been. Or maybe I did and I didn't know it. So if you were when I'm up, I apologize. I'm like everybody else. I'm just, normal or crazy normal, whichever you may be.
And I have to, there's a message here, and the message, God wanted me to do this with you.
Yeah.
I mean, everything from you taking your day off today, which you never do.
Yeah, people. I had a personal emergency day already scheduled because my husband had we have a group of friends coming over when we had first started original small group Bible study. And we decided to get together because we're no longer doing the Bible study. My husband's been called into another realm called Iron to Iron.
Yeah.
Check it out. It's here in Canton, Ohio.
Yeah.
Every Saturday morning.
Mike Gorfito is part of that.
Yes.
People know him from this podcast.
And I don't even remember where I was going. But
you said you called off today because of that, because you were going to get together with your group. Because Jeff told me you're having a cookout today.
Yes. And then when Joe texted me, God was telling me it's time to share. And I said, okay, Lord, you do it. It's not me. It hasn't been me for a long time, because in Israel, we were on a boat. I'm trying to remember, but we were on Daniel's boat, and he had said that Hillsong had been there the year before, and they were on his boat when
Hillsong
yes,
is a group.
yes,
I don't know.
it's a Christian group.
Okay.
And they were doing a tour of Israel, and they were doing songs at various places all over Israel. And they set up his boat, and they sang, and they did their video of Oceans, and he played it. And at that time, the healing began. The healing was done. I said, okay, Lord, whatever you want, I'm all in. It's not me. It's never been me, but it's been him through me. People can see your joy.
But you didn't realize that.
Oh yeah. But there was a Bible verse. Of course, I had to take a screenshot. And it stood out. People had always told me that when I was reading the Bible, it's like it became boldened. And I was like, I've never had that. Why? And when I was in Israel, one of my really good friends, her and her husband did a small group when we were going to a previous church. And she was there. So she was there for my healing. And this is John 15, verse 16. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you.
Amen.
I had never, and I told her, I went over to her and I said, Patty, I said, have you ever had the words? And they like elevate off of the page. And she goes, you did. I was like, yeah. I was like, I had to blink, because I was like, I've never seen that. And she goes, that's going to be part of your healing. That's going to be part of your story. Mm-hmm. And when we were the very first time when we went to Israel, when I stepped foot, my husband, he previously bartended, so he's got those spidey senses. And when I stepped foot on Israel, I felt like I was home. Wow. There were the Israeli army, absolutely fabulous. I actually went up and talked to a couple of them. I wasn't going to take their picture because they were in uniform. I don't know their rules or their regulations, but I thanked them. I said, thank you for securing this place. I said, I love it here. But I mean, there was one time we were in the Garden Tomb, and they heard gunshots. Well, I remember back in the day when you had a car that actually had a carburetor, when it wasn't cleaned properly, it would backfire. So that's what I thought it was. And they ended up closing certain doors, and they were like, oh, you can't go out. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll go to the gift shop then. Easy peasy.
But it was
gunfire. Yeah. And we had our tour guide was Jewish, but our bus driver was Arab. So we would, and they would use their connections. So if they had a certain where we would go and what we would do. And if there was unrest, we would change and go do something else. So it was always ever changing, but always felt safe. Never felt like I was in harm's way, because I knew God had us.
Yeah.
And he wasn't done.
So what do you see for your life going forward now?
I always ask every trip, Lord, put me where you want me. Help me to help others, and help others to see you through me. I always ask, Lord, if this mission is complete, you have to literally show it to me in neon letters. Hit me in the back of the head with the 2x4. Because it's not about me. People who know me, I used to be structured. I couldn't fly by the seat of my pants like I can now. And yesterday with a debacle, and the flight that I was going to be on canceled.
You were so cool.
And I was like, oh crap, what am I going to do now? And then I'm like, Cleveland. I'm like, Jeff's retired. let's see if he'll come get me. So I sent him a text. I'm like, okay. I'm
You
like,
knew he would.
oh, yeah. And I told him, I said, go get my car at the Canton Akron Airport. I gave him the directions since it was employee parking and you can't get in there without a code. And so he came and got me. And I drove home because I see better. That's his eye is still healing. But traffic doesn't dazzle me. So it is what it is. But yeah.
So are you in? You're in the best place of your life right now.
Yeah.
You've healed. You understand how wonderful you are and how you were created in God's image.
It's the compassion. I get it now.
You get what?
The compassion that God had for everybody.
And does that translate then in you giving that same compassion to everybody you meet?
Yeah. When I'm in the airport, some flight attendants will go sit somewhere so they don't have to kind of interact with people. It might be their downtime, but I'm like, I'm Jesus with skin on. I'm his hands and feet. I'm that square peg that doesn't fit in that round hole. I had a girlfriend who she called herself, she did marketing promotions, so she did square peg promotions because she was just like that. She didn't fit in the world.
Do you feel that?
Some ways I do.
Yeah.
Some ways I don't. I'm like, I've been a flight attendant for 5 years. I've had a schedule for probably 3. When COVID hit, I was at the bottom. So I had to get a crash pad, which means an apartment that you share with multiple people that are in the airline industry. You have a bed. You have a small place to put your things. You live out of a suitcase, which is not structured, just telling you. Learn how to pack. Yeah. But I was the hands and feet of Jesus then too. I was always watching. I was always watching people. I am now an official people watcher. I love watching people. I love being out there. I love helping. And some people are like, but you're not even you don't even work here. I said, well, no, but they don't either. They just need to go. They need to know where to go.
Right.
I said, I'm always willing to help. I mean, I worked at the airport, so I know the ins and outs. I know both sides. And so people, when you're looking up and you're not looking at your phone, and you might be bebopping to music, because, anytime people bebopping and I might start singing, and then people look and just kind of chuckle, and I'm like, yeah, that's me. But they're looking for somebody friendly because some of them are so stressed out, the workers, with just the weather and just, things at work or things in life. They bring it to work. And I've always been taught, or it's just been something that's been ingrained, even through teachers that I had. They were like, everybody has problems. But when you close your car door, leave your problems in there. They'll be there when you get back. And I have learned to do that. I don't sweat the small stuff anymore. There have been times I've had to call Jeff when I was based at Washington Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. There was one time I was trying to get home before a storm, and it was like a Thanksgiving storm, and it was going to hit. It was going to have black ice and all this kind of hooey. And I was like, crud, how am I going to get home? Because it's like all the flights were full. And I was like, so I'm thinking, and I keep calling him, and I'm like, no, I don't need you to fix it. I just need to talk to you so I can fix it. And I just let you know what's going to go on. And so I'm like, okay, I'll go to Pittsburgh. I'm like, no, I'm not going to be able to go to Pittsburgh because all that's full. And I'm like, how about Charlie West? And he was like, where's that? I was like, oh, Charleston, West Virginia. That's that's part of the lingo. And he was like, that's a 3-hour drive. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, okay. He's like, I'll be able to get there and then get back, and we'll get back before the ice is supposed to hit. And I was like, okay, we'll do that. Worked. No, didn't need to do it because God made a way, because Julie was trying to do it on her own instead of just breathing and letting God do it. So I used my tablet that I have for work, and I looked up the flight that was going direct from DC to Canton Akron. 2 seats magically appeared, and I got on. He didn't have to drive. God made a way.
Let me ask, we're going to wrap up, and this hour goes fast.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I know. People come on and they say, "Oh, how are we going to talk for an hour?" And you just start talking, and pretty soon it's you could go for 2 or 3. And I appreciate that. If you had a lesson, if you had one thing that you could tell people out there who maybe don't know the Lord or don't know the Lord and maybe know that there's a God but have never turned their lives over to Christ. I don't want to, and we could always cut this if there isn't anything you want to say. Zach is great at that, but if there's one thing you tell people out of your life who maybe don't know Christ.
I never had to worry about not having him in my life. He's always been in my life. Even when life got hard after the divorce, I always made a choice. Kids, we're going to church. Sunday is church. Whether you like it or not, we need church. We need God. We need our community. God does not want us to do it alone. Yes, we have him, but we also need people. He tells us to lock arms because the enemy is at hand. He will find the crevice to where you're the most weakest and attack you.
Yeah.
And when you give your life to God, it's not easy, because don't think for a minute that Satan is going to stop. He is going to try harder, because when he has you, he doesn't need to worry. So don't think that things are ever going to be easy, because when Jeff and I found each other and we got married, the first year was rough. But I chose not to believe the lies that were being told, because God told me. God told me to trust, and I did. And when it all finally came out, all said and done, I trusted God, and I knew he was right.
And he came through.
Yes.
Which he always does.
Always does. He is never late. It's always living in the microwave society we want it now. Sometimes he says no. Sometimes there's silence. But sometimes he will give you the answers in the littlest ways. But if you're not watching, you won't see it. But you're never late. Not ever to this game.
I want you to know, and we're going to wrap up here. I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank you, Julie, for being here, and for Jeff for kind of being in the middle of all this and saying,
Yep.
"Hey, yeah, she's excited about doing this or whatever." But I want you to know how important, how much you and Jeff mean to me, to this church. I'm grateful. I am so grateful that you are in my life.
Amen.
And so thank you so much. We continue to grow together. We continue to learn together. We continue to learn that we're accepted together.
Amen.
And I appreciate that. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for being here and sharing. And again, if you enjoy us and you enjoy this journey, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all those things. But God bless you. And we hope that you join us again next week. Thank you.